It's exquisite in its beauty. It is something to keep you awake at night and to wake you up in the morning. But now let's find equally exquisite solutions. We've been doing some of that over the course of the last couple of days, but we need to catalogue them, to firm them up, and to have an action plan for us to take forward. We need facts on the ground. We have also got a discussion to be had about the Human Continuity Project, which is a real opportunity. But how do we leverage that real opportunity? How do we amplify the effects of that real opportunity? How can we stop talking to ourselves? One of the wonderful yet horrifying parts of these last 3 days is that we all know each other very well. We don't want people here that we know very well, or at least we do, but we don't want only those we know very well. We want new recruits. We want the fresh, the ignorant, the people that we need to persuade. And that's not you. You're the people who've got to do the persuading. How do we measure how we are doing? How do we know that we are making progress? And for that purpose, we have the most fantastic panel here this morning. And I'm not going to ask them each to introduce themselves because you know them all well by now. I am instead going to ask each of them to produce two, to start with, two key points that they think we should be operating on as a plan of action. I'm going to start, Washington, with you, if you may, because you are our gracious host. So, Washington, what are your two key points? Udi.
Unless there are two missing people who are going to show up later, I suggest to remove those two chairs. It's going to look horrible or ridiculous.
Well, no, don't do that. Before you do that, I have on my list that
they're late, but they're supposedly coming.
Trent Franks is meant to be joining us now. I've seen him.
He's here.
Oh, sorry, you are there. Sorry, you were right.
Matt Gardner and
Matt.
Ian Luca are. Oh, okay, so Matt isn't. Okay.
So that's one chair away.
Okay.
Oh,
really? Okay. All right.
Oh, okay.
Then
let's do what is suggested. Let's snuggle up a bit closer to this end. Thank you very much. I'd do it myself, but I broke my collarbone skiing.
Okay, great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. Now we're comfortable to discuss.
Okay, thanks very much,
Thank you all.
Lord James, and good morning, everyone. Two actionable points, I think. The first one you'd expect me to say as a scientist, engineer, and innovator sitting at a university is the need for tools, appropriate tools. And by that I mean multi-stakeholder appropriate tools that we can use. So that's my first item. We were shown genome, and I think you can appreciate the potential power of such a tool if it is an accurate, reliable, credible, multiple stakeholder capable tools. The second one is I'm very, very keen on the human dimension.
Sorry, before you move off that first one, how do we create those tools? What do we actually do?
So we need to understand the threats. We need to understand model threats. We need to work together to be able to innovate and design, implement, and plan those tools. So this seeks a collaboration between everybody. We need data and so on. But what we would like to have is an encapsulation of all of the facets of that tool, data, threats, threat modeling, and so on, to be able to use the likes of AI and all these advanced analytics, infrastructure, interdependency modeling. We talked about digital twinning. So we do have, obviously, the scientific muscle at a university like Imperial College London to be able to deal with the complexities of modeling and so on. We are not averse to taking head-on hyper complexity. The human has been averse to taking on these hyper complex problems for too long. We are equal to the challenge at Imperial, working with those here and those outside of here to be able to bring about such a tool. Now, EIS has started with this plug and play Windows type platform called Genome. And I'm suggesting that's where we start with tools. So my second point is the thing to do with the human dimension. And I'm very much taken by the lack of success in persuading our politicians to join in with us. And I do love the idea of addressing directly the electorate, basically training the electorate to persuade the politicians that what we are talking about here is also important for their being in government, being elected. So training the public to train the rest of society, including the politicians. I should declare here that I have the privilege of chairing the board of the Science Museum in London. We get millions of visitors coming every single year. I can imagine a booth within the Science Museum that is training the public on this. And there is a tangible step also, at least in the United Kingdom, where we could begin to effect that particular bit of training the public to enable us to get to the politicians. So those would be my first two actionable points. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Washington. Trent, what would your two be?
Well, you know, I first of all appreciate being with all of you again this morning. I remember when this issue was in the nation stage and no one was really even sure whether it was a problem or not. And the best way that we were able to accentuate the problem was to go to the military, because we never had to argue with them. We've spent billions of dollars hardening some of our critical defense assets from EMP, EMI, and they didn't argue about whether there was a problem or not. And we were able to, using that, help people understand that this was a national security threat, regardless of whether it's America or England or wherever it was, that this had to do with human continuity, and that we needed to make sure that our grids were safe. So the two things I would say that are most important is, first of all, to recognize that the only real defense that we have to devalue a potential opponent's weaponized EMP is to harden our grids. I don't know how to make it any simpler than that. And I think we have to use hardware-based systems rather than procedural-based systems. And that means we need grids that are essentially impervious as much as possible. And I know Terry Boston knows this more than anybody does, and it's hard to plug all the holes, as he says. And he's correct. But the more impervious our system is, the less an enemy is tempted. And the more vulnerable it is, the more he or she is tempted. And so I suggest hardening the grid. It's as simple as I know how to say it in the first place. And then the second thing is to realize that the civilian grid is critical to that process. The military cannot affect their mission apart from the civilian grid. In America, it's about 99% of the military's electricity comes from the civilian grid. So they can't do that. And we need to recognize now that the military has understood that electromagnetic energy is the coming dynamic of warfare. I mean, about half of our resources on an F-18 on the carriers now are dedicated to electromagnetic warfare. We have the CHAMPS program in America now, where we can fly over 3 buildings in a city block, take out the center building, and leave the other 2 untouched via a cruise missile or an aircraft. And so it's going to be important to begin to, as the professor says here, to begin to educate the public to realize that this is a new area of warfare, a new area of human dynamics, and we need to be ahead of it. My last illustration is this. When I was chairman of the Missile Defense Caucus, and we had a big debate in Congress as to whether or not we should have missile defense, space-based missile defense. And the debate was, well, we don't want to weaponize space. And my point was, well, unfortunately, our near-peer adversaries are already doing that. And we held back a long time before we really responded. And we were way behind. We still are. I carried an amendment that literally took 11 years before it was successful. And we're now building a space-based layer of missile defense that could be of importance to the UK and certainly to America. But the reason for the illustration is if we don't get involved, if we don't move now, if we don't begin to be proactive, then I think that we're making a terrible mistake. I've said it probably every one of these conferences, Chris, that there is a moment in the life of every problem when it is big enough to be seen and still small enough to be addressed. We need to, number one, make sure we harden our grid. Number two, we need to help the people of the world understand that this new foray into electromagnetic warfare and electromagnetic vulnerability is vital for us to understand and to be capable of competing with anyone in the world on that basis.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Trent. Michael.
Thank you. Well, our overall challenge is, of course, the modern society's dependence on electricity. And of course, it is important, like Trent just said, to try to harden our grids. But on the same time, we know that in urban areas, society, in the case of a large outage, will collapse within a few days. And that leads me to the conclusion that there is a need to shift focus from protecting the grid, which in the long run is an impossible task, to make society less dependent, not on electricity, because that is impossible, but less dependent on the grid. There is a need for more reserve capacity in order to handle the time needed for restoring the system after a major outage. And as we all know, it takes some time to restore. And we need to buy ourselves that time. Another thing that I think is important is to make not the public, but the political leadership more aware of the hazards we face. I think there is a need not only to talk about early warning systems and that sort of things. There is also a need for more of practice and training on all levels, how to act in the case of an emergency. Today, practice and training is focused on the people pulling the buttons, but there is also a need for a lot of training among decision makers and those who are responsible for crisis management on the highest level.
Michael, that's extremely helpful. Can you just outline what the Swedish Academy of Military Training is, which involves politicians, industrialists, and academics, because it's a model I think that other countries could usefully follow.
Well, I used to be president of the Royal Swedish Academy of War Sciences, and that is a society trying to get together high-ranking military officers, people from the political world, and from different enterprises. And it is, of course, aiming at to stimulate research within all aspects of warfare and civil crises. And well, I do think that when it comes to I think research in this security research on the whole is very important. I had the privilege to sign a bilateral research agreement between the United States and Sweden with Secretary Chertoff 12 years ago, and I think that cooperation has been quite fruitful.
There is this academy which in Sweden top politicians, top trade union officials, top industrialists positively fight to get a place on. And it takes weeks out of their working year. And if they fail to turn up on the first day, they're sacked from their place and they have to apply for another year. And they hate that and they don't do it. And they really turn up for training. It's an extraordinary example that I think countries all around the world should follow. Avi, you have one or two things, I dare say, you might like to suggest.
Yeah, just a few notes that not more than 7 or 8 pages of highlights. So maybe at some point we can dive in a little more detail. But if I were to try to reach to an overall recommendation, I would say this. We began collectively looking at these issues. Many people who are here collectively began looking at these in the context of previous conferences like this and in other ways many years ago. We have built over the years our knowledge, expanded our networks of connectivity, both in terms of what we know and the people, the organizations who are in touch with us. That's all very good. But for it to mean something, we have to decide when we've gotten to the point that we can actually do something that will begin aggressively and rapidly addressing the problem. So there have been many small steps here in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in Israel, to some extent in a few other locations that have emerged from this focus on extreme hazards. That is not nearly enough, and it has not been going fast enough. So I propose the following. I suggest we conclude we have done enough. We've gotten to the point where we are ready to actually try to move quickly to begin a process to get this global civilization scale hazard addressed. Either we're all wrong and there's actually no issue and life will go on even if nothing happens. I think that's not correct. Or we're collectively right and we are dealing with an unprecedented civilization scale, global scale fragility. there are really very few groups and organizations that address this in a positive, action-oriented, what do we need to do fashion. Not in a sort of global, what do we need to do, but specifically, as you said, Professor Oching, what are the tools? What are the most important initial tools that are needed? You know, where's the systems engineering process that is needed to take a look at those tools, find the missing pieces, begin laying out priorities, begin developing a systematic global plan to address the fragility and the hazards together on the same scale and with the same diligence that the world's aerospace industry designs high-value satellites. I mean, let's think about it. High-value satellite civilization, high-value satellite civilization. I would say civilization maybe is even more important than the things and the toys that we build and the instruments that we build. But we have not taken the same kind of technology that is used to make sure we found the problems, the pieces, and developed an actionable step-by-step milestone plan to build high-value instruments and applied it to the problem of the continuity of civilization. So that is an opportunity. The Human Continuity Project is a framework that we collectively, many of us here, have developed that is designed to provide a framework to begin a collaborative process worldwide to get this done. It is intended to include research organizations, academic organizations, an advisory group made up of utilities, government agencies, major corporations, to collectively, on a civilization scale, look at, okay, where are the issues? Where are the capabilities needed to address those issues? And let's begin designing, developing, acquiring where they already exist, implementing and deploying. So I would recommend everyone here, if you don't have access to a copy of the 3-page white paper and some of the supplementary material that discuss this, let us know, we'll get it to you. I recommend that you personally, and in terms of in the context of your organization, look at planning to participate in that effort, look at critiquing it, recommending changes. Let's make it our collective framework. Anything is adjustable, but we need a framework to collaboratively bring the best capabilities that are out there on the planet to focus on the most extreme risk that we collectively face on this planet. It is amazing that that has not yet happened. Let's not leave today without taking a personal commitment to get involved and actually begin collectively driving a process to make something happen. Everyone here is connected to different organizations. Let's reach out very broadly at government levels, government agencies. We already have some government involvement that is committed, some corporate involvement that's committed, a number of certainly Imperial College London, other British and American major universities. It needs to go much further.
This white paper on the website?
There's a web version on the EIS Council website, but we could get you a PDF as well.
And what is the precise title of this white paper?
It's Human Continuity Project.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Link being sent now by Leahy to everybody.
Actions are happening.
Yeah, during the course of the meeting. Okay.
well, you know, let's make it collectively ours. And I would reach out to the students as well. You know, it would be fantastic to get your ideas on what role can PhD students, for example, play who have focus in different areas and different sectors that are going to be very important to address this. You know, what is the right role in the context of this project for students who represent an extraordinary and growing capability with obviously connectivity and reach into the future?
Harvey, can you outline the differences between the Human Continuity Project and the Genome Project, please?
So the idea behind the Human Continuity Project is, I mean, logically, let's look at it this way. There are a small set of particularly critical tools and capabilities without which there's really nothing to talk about in the event that the power grid shuts down, the natural gas pipeline network shut down, whatever it is of our interconnected infrastructures. We need to have widely deployed, very well hardened communication. We need to have a chaos management capability to get some machine help to deal with a complex catastrophe where we needed a new word to expand on complex. In the event of a major societal shutdown of major infrastructures, no human will be able to handle this. That's genome. We need to have a few other simple capabilities. One example was, all of these were discussed during the conference, but one is long duration power module that every facility in every sector, every important facility in every business sector that is going to be needed by society or wants to continue operating in a crisis could at least have enough power to keep their most critical instruments operating for weeks, if not months. These are all capabilities that are commercially available today, or in the case of Genome, in development. These represent core elements of a starting point for the Human Continuity Project. How do we develop these? How do we prioritize them? How or should they be deployed as a function of key priorities in different regions? How should they develop? And then what is the context around them? What are the critical supply chains and the interdependencies? And to wrap all of that together, coming back to the systems engineering framework, which Professor Ocheng, you pointed out very properly months ago, needs to be the envelope that guides the entire process. So that's the difference. Genome is a core critical element of the project.
Great. Thanks very much. Yes, Yoav.
Just a short comment. The great overlap we are doing it, what the UT project stands for.
And already, okay, sorry.
Good morning, I'm working out.
Okay, there's already an existing framework by the UN, and it's called the Sendai Framework 2015-2030 for disaster risk reduction, UNDRR framework. And this UN, I would say, envelope greatly overlaps with what you've just said. I'm not sure that we are aware of the Sendai plan or a manifestation of principles of disaster risk reduction, but these UN agencies offer courses to mayors and decision makers at the urban and municipal level how to better prepare their city to an impending disaster. And it doesn't need to be a global scale disaster. It can be a regional one or even a local one. But there is already a framework, an international one, with all UN signatory states affirming it and confirming it.
Yes, finding a way to partner with the United Nations and find a partnership role for that framework, I think is a superb idea. certainly UK CRIC and other organizations here in the United Kingdom are already connected, and we're certainly aware of that. Its focus does not, of course, sufficiently span the level of extreme hazards with the global interdependencies to address extreme risks in a very explicit, action-oriented, what do we need first, second, third, and how do we get it deployed? In that fashion, it has not, it does not do that. But you're right, that's only one. There are other frameworks out there with which the Human Continuity Project could be allied. So I encourage you and anyone else who has related systems, let's find a way to get them connected.
Okay, I think we've all said that working together with others is good. Yes, Lawrence. I'm going to get Persia.
Sorry, Persia. Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the Sendai framework, but also SDGs and other. My practical experience, because I have worked with them in projects and so on, is very, very difficult to align. It is very difficult to work with them because, you know, these are big organizations with big strategic objectives, and they are strategic, and they operate at a level which would cause a problem for the more operational and delivery focused activities that we want from the Human Continuity Project. So I think aligning to them, understanding the complementarity, the relationship, and where you can work in areas, but once you get in there, then politics starts to happen, and you become stifled. So well, that's my suggestion.
Let's take that as a warning. When we align this project with existing massive frameworks that clearly have not addressed this problem, we need to do so in a way that will not hinder us. If we hog-tie this process with the usual reams of red tape and restrictions, it will go nowhere. So we need to work hard to make sure that does not happen. So, and I think that won't be a problem, because this can be a private sector initiative with advisory roles for the public sector.
Lawrence says, and have them want to join the project on our terms. But let's not forget that size should not be a problem. The bigger that this becomes, the happier we should be, I think. Right now I'm moving to Persia, because it is it's your turn to produce 2 points, but during the course of what you say, Persia, could you possibly, because I knew about the known knowns, I knew about the known unknowns, and I knew about the unknown unknowns, but I wonder if you could expand a bit on the unknown knowns, because I felt confused.
You know, these questions have been floating around about this, right? And first though, I need to say that, you know, Avi pumps me up. He gets me so excited. He gets me so motivated. I just want to pause a minute because, man, you know, call to action. I just feel like, you know, running out the door here on fire. You know, let's do it now.
Great.
So I'm very excited. Thank you for that, as well as the comments that we've heard already. I mean, there's just so many places to look. And so a little bit simpler for me than to stand back and talk about the known knowns. And I mean, I just want to say, you know, this is something that I've thought about, and especially in the way in emergency management, the way we try to prepare for these disasters. And when you talk about this catastrophic, terrible disaster, that it's now a matter of when, really, because we would have said the same thing about the pandemic 10 years ago, that it wasn't coming and blow it off. But looking at that, you know, I think it's a good place to sort of frame out, tell you guys what I've been thinking. So what our friend Donald Rumsfeld said in 2002, he was talking about three things, really. He talked about known knowns, the things we know. And then he went on to talk about the known unknowns, the things we know that we don't know. And he was talking about defense in this particular case, and he went right into the unknown unknowns. And in that case, he was talking about weapons of mass destruction. You guys remember the whole story. What started pinging around in my brain was the thing that I didn't hear him talk about or mention in those comments, and that was the unknown knowns my colleague is talking to me about. And that is the things we don't know that we know. So how do we go beyond the known knowns? In emergency management, at least particularly with us, we tend to train and spend time and spend money and spend energy on the known knowns, what we know, almost as if we are training just up to our capacity that we already recognize. Just go into that line. And then we train again and we do exercises again. And it's always typically something we know that we know, something we know we can respond to, something we know we can be successful at. We can check the box and say we did that. And not with any disrespect to anyone here, because I understand the idea. We want to build confidence, and I think we have to build readiness, and we have to maintain that level of readiness, of course, so we're always prepared. But for all of the 85 or 90% of the time that we spend on the known knowns, what if we shifted focus and spent more time in two quadrants, and I'm thinking of four now, the three Rami mentioned and the one I just suggested on the unknown knowns, that we don't spend nearly as much time in. So on the known unknowns, I applaud my colleagues on the known unknowns, the things that we know we don't know, spending time on the black sky question. How are we going to face that? Spending time, this idea of the human continuity project, the ideas of solar flares we're looking at more now, the electromagnetic pulse ideas, all of those things are in that known unknown quadrant. What I want to look at and what I've done in our program in the BEOC is I've really tried to examine this unknown knowns. Why have I done that? Now we're talking about things we don't know that we know. And I'm talking about collectively we don't know, because we're in silos, private, public, science, universities, healthcare, all these different silos. Collectively, we don't know what anyone else knows. I don't know what they're doing in healthcare. Healthcare doesn't know what they're doing here. The folks that are working on these different scientific healthcare breakthroughs, they don't know what I know. And we all know it, but we don't know. And that's what I mean, if that makes some more sense, about this unknown knowns. Now,
that makes perfect sense. Thank you very much indeed.
Now, what's important about it, and my points that I'm going to make as far as my suggestions on going forward is, we've got a great broad area here of opportunity in these unknown knowns. And we do that in my work. I do that in my job in the BEOC on uncovering these capabilities. So looking at folks in business, in private sector, that they developed a system, they developed a tool. They're using it for a particular reason because it's their business. They have developed this great thing because it's what they do, and their objective is profit-driven. That's great, whatever their operation is. But government doesn't know about it, and they don't know the government can use it. But in the steps we take in joint training, we do a lot of joint exercises, and we stress systems, and that's the key, stressing the system, not just practicing to surge up to what you know you can know, what you know. But those capabilities become uncovered, and suddenly someone in the room, and that's critical, getting them all in the room, taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, do you know we can do that? Maybe we're not going to use that tool in the way it was originally designed, but we're going to use it in a way that now it impacts survivability. It impacts response. It impacts recovery and thereby builds capacity, resiliency. So if we are going to build the kind of resilience that we would like to see quickly, maybe it won't take years of research if we already know it, but we don't know we know. Maybe we can dig deeper into those areas, and that's what I think where we need to push really on a lot of these private-public partnerships, not just on, what we know. So I'd like to see us spend more time in those quadrants, build those resiliencies. I think that it was buy us time to uncover and discover and create the tools that could help us to respond and defend ourselves for the unknowables, the unknown unknowns. Because we may not be able to eliminate those, and certainly we can't, but we can buy time, very much the way we did with the pandemic, where we had to buy time to create a vaccine. What were we doing in the meantime? So this is an opportunity, I think, to learn and to grow and to learn how we can at least better defend ourselves in the short run. In the military, if you get beat up out there at your furthest perimeter, you have a fallback point. And I guess that's what I'm talking about, having a fallback point, buying that time to be able to fall back. But ultimately, I think that we can, we have the great potential to reduce our fragility, our vulnerabilities, and hopefully to reduce the impacts of the unknowables. Those are my comments.
Great. Chris.
Just want to say that there's a new focus now, understanding on the concept of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think about it in this resilience context, in this preparedness context, and it gets to the unknown knowns, right? It's that including more people with diverse viewpoints and knowledge bases means that we're going to find out, that the people in that silo know this, the people in that tribe know this. So this is an overall, it's not just a nice thing to do, it's a smart thing to do, and it enhances resilience when we actually talk to each other and we learn from each other.
Okay. Yes. Would you like a mic? You can have a microphone. You can have mine.
Where am I going?
So Tom Dolan from UCL. Talk to the top. Okay. Well, that does make a difference. I'm doing it wrong all this time. Tom Dolan from UCL. So the known unknowns framework, there's a psychology framework called the Johari window that talks about what you know about yourself and what others know about you that you don't know about yourself. And it's very similar. And I think if we applied that at the individual, the collective scales, collaborative scales, it starts to apply what you're saying, Persia. And I think it's a really useful addition to what you're saying. And also the concept of the grey rhino is one about clear and obvious threats that we're failing to respond to, coming from Michelle Vickers' work. And I think that's also highly relevant to what you're saying. So just thought I'd throw those in as useful allies for your arguments.
And I see it tying into the Human Continuity Project. I see it tying in very easily and buying us time for to get to Abby's action plan. Is that what you're going to talk about?
No, I just wanted to comment. Absolutely, and in fact, we've seen that problem, the unknown knowns, constantly. Each of the different critical utility sectors tends to work in a silo. They don't have many opportunities to talk to each other. Even the most fundamental ideas, the most fundamental requirements that each need from each other are not really understood. In an extreme disaster, what must I have from your sector? I don't know, tell me, and vice versa. And that is a core example of the systems engineering process, which is designed to evaluate what are all the connectivities, what are the interface requirements back and forth. So it's what you're talking about. There are superb frameworks to go dive down and deal with that. And that's the envelope that we need to wrap around the whole project.
No, I think that's a good example, what you just said. You know, we were talking earlier, I guess it was on the first day on Monday, when you were talking about how, oh, we've got all these critical infrastructure sectors, and I know there are however many in the US and there's different numbers in Sweden and then in the UK, that they are all connected. But are they talking to each other?
No, they're not only connected with each other, but they all are tightly coupled and dependent on complex supply chains, layer by layer. So evaluating this whole process in a systems engineering framework or some other very capable framework is absolutely critical, especially over time. You know, we've cherry-picked some of the most critical and obvious missing pieces, but that's just the beginning. How do we find the others? It's going to be looking for these unknown knowns using some process like the aerospace class systems engineering.
I think there's a use case in there somewhere. So someone in this room needs to dig into that, a use case involving that, and I know somebody's going to say it's going to be me. I feel that coming. That there needs to be some type of use case. So for instance, in a big hurricane or flood or whatever that is, in our emergency operations center, we're unique in the US in that we bring all the private sector into the emergency operations center. We incorporate them into this operations center. Now, something I suggested to other states to do, and they may have 1 or 2 folks in there, but I've had the privilege of having 45 company representatives in with us during Hurricane Florence, for instance. And that was across about 10 sectors of business and industry, talking to each other, run of the EOC, talking to the Department of Transportation, talking to public health, talking to forestry, talking to commerce, all talking to each other and coming up with solutions that we never had before. Now, had we not had a bad hurricane, would that have happened? But I don't think, do we want to get to that disaster before we say, holy cow, now we need to fix it right now?
That's the process we need.
Okay. Can I have that? This is not just to discipline you two to take the microphone away from me. It is because we are eventually going to come to Sally. But before we do,
Yeah, we had one.
then you, so 1, 2, 3, and then we will come to Sally, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so I'd like to touch on 2 aspects. First, the getting real part and the unknown knowns. And this will be controversial probably, but in getting involved in this, I have interviewed many, many people who are involved in electrical infrastructure and critical infrastructure. And these are all off the record conversations. And I've asked all of them, and everybody that I've talked to who really knows about how long it takes to get high capacity transformers or to build new transmission lines or any of that. When I say, well, the latest American administration goals are 50% or 60% EVs by 2030. And I think of the anecdote we heard before about the 4 cars in the Walmart parking lot. And I dare say that there are very few people in this room that think that our critical infrastructure, our electric infrastructure, is going to be able to come and meet that goal, even half of it. And I'm concerned that there is an unknown known. When I say unknown, I mean by the general public, but is known by, the experts in the field, that we're not going to make that goal. And to some extent, I think the engineers and science people in this world are kind of playing an enabling role in saying, well, just between us, no way we're going to make it. And meantime, we're also facing a world in which, the general public and our politicians are paying no attention to this, civilization threatening, set of civilization threats that we face. It's a little like saying, I'm healthy, I'm exercising, and therefore I don't need to put on a seatbelt when I'm driving around. We need to say you have to, and require seatbelts in cars. And so what I'm arguing for is that this group of people who are, serving society and very, dutiful, let's say, are not being confrontational enough about how important this is, and that we don't have enough people in the marketing and public relations and government relations area that are screaming about this issue. And instead, we're pretending like, we're going to be able to spend trillions of dollars to make these, these unrealistic goals, and we're not willing to spend, billions on critical infrastructure hardening and, response systems. So I may only be speaking for myself, but I suspect there are a lot of people who also feel like we as a society are focusing on, a very long-term threat and not focusing on the thing that could happen literally tomorrow.
Yes, we are a good example of known unknowns, because we in this room know all this stuff and everybody else out there doesn't. Lawrence.
So thank you for that. I'm going to be a little bit confrontational because, and Persia, what you say, fantastic. We do communicate. All of those agencies sit around the table, they exercise together. They have local resilience forums in this country and so on. But there is a structural issue. So what we're talking about is, the known unknowns, the unknown, all of that. But when, forgive my language, when the shit hits the fan, we always fall back on the military. Militaries, generally, by and large, are contingency organizations. They train and they train and they exercise to fail. Civil society agencies and organizations do not do that. And why don't they do that? There is no budget to do that. There is no policy. There is no mandate for them to do that. And increasingly, the responsibility and the risk has gone centralized. So until civil society and the civilian agencies have the wherewithal to do more training, do more exercising, to get round the table and in the same tent, to understand who knows what, where do they know it, who has the risk, who has the responsibility, who has the capability, and who has the capacity. That ability to collaborate and share and put the tasks with the correct owner, even though they may not have the mandate and own the risk, that's not going to happen. So I would argue, and communication and marketing and actually advertising, which has the ability to sway emotional and rational decisions, is a vital tool that's missing from this whole conversation.
What we're really looking for are what's in it for everybody.
Okay. Over there. We can't rely on the military, by the way, Lawrence. Both of our soldiers are otherwise engaged.
Okay. Hi, I'm Emma. I'm a PhD student here at Imperial, and this might be a bit of a distraction, but I hope it's not. I've noticed we've done a lot of talking about the resilience of the grid and transport and logistics and all these like incredibly important things in the context of an emergency. But I'm a waste management specialist, and I can't help but think that Fergus Harradance mentioned this very briefly yesterday, that in an emergency context, you've got to think about sanitation, otherwise you're going to have disease. But my type of waste management, it's sanitation, sewage, but it produces methane gas, which is a source of energy. And, a lot of the colleagues in my lab are looking at ways to treat waste to produce energy and all these things that could greatly increase resilience. And so I wanted to ask, has this been considered and it's been determined that this is not like absolutely critical to resilience and that's why it hasn't been represented? Or is this a genuine blind spot, like an unknown known?
Avi, would you like to answer that?
So I have a quick answer to that, which is that it has been considered, and we looked at, first of all, that sewage systems and water treatment systems are critically important, and one of the key infrastructures that would fail and cause the most problems in a black sky event are those, right? You can imagine you can live in your apartment for a week without the lights on, but not a week without the toilet working, right? I mean, and society will not work with sewage systems overflowing into the street and so on. The lights are out. That it's the things that the electricity powers like that are super important. And it is very exciting that this ability to use that methane that's produced in the cleaning process I've seen some plants that it basically can self-power or so then the unknown known, then there's one near and dear and kind of breaking my heart in Washington, D.C., which is that they started generating their power, but they didn't make the additional investment in the electrical infrastructure, so they can't island, right? So they're saving money by generating power, but in the case where a grid went down, that plant would still fail, right? Because they would be pushing power out into a blacked out grid instead of being able to island themselves and at least keep the water treatment facility running. So there's one, so it's like there has to be this thought of, can we keep it under self-power and then electrically islanded off, so at least this part doesn't fail, even if the larger grid is out, we haven't lost that critical function. Great question.
Avi, Chris has answered it beautifully. Sorry, Sally's turn.
What's your name again? I'm sorry?
Emma.
Emma. So first of all, we need you in the Human Continuity Project. But one of the things you should ask us for is the detailed sewage spill scenario that has been looked at in a genome context. So we actually have a video we could show you.
Well, it was worth waiting for Sally, because you're going to give us your 2 points now.
Hello, everyone. I've been listening to what everyone's been talking about for the last 3 days, and there's a way I think things can be summarised. Firstly, there needs to be a framework, but also principles set up for this initiative. And sitting up in the back, we have Hugh Boys, who did the framework and principles for cybersecurity of infrastructure in the UK as the first initiative many years ago. These are very important for setting your pathways. Secondly, our international approach, what we have talked about is looking at how we link in internationally. I would repeat that the G20 and NATO are very important, and building bridges across into climate change and those initiatives, and those bridges will strengthen us. The way in which we look at communication is extremely important. How are we going to brand this? There are things we obviously have to be global to local, and listening to what's just been said, we also have to mine human capability. And in the two concepts, we've talked small community adaptability and survival. But one of the students, who I don't know if she's here today, brought up yesterday that we need to understand the strength of whole society, a whole population in a country as well, and what that can do. At the national level, we do need independent czars for this initiative. And in doing that, we will get an international point of communication for areas that are being missed by the population. A fearless statement of some of the things that have been said this morning about the capacity for the grids to supply the electric vehicle industry is very important. At the national level going down into cities, what I've talked about is it's very important for cities to also have a focus in this. And very much, I've talked to you about post-nuclear attack regeneration. The principle being, which is applicable to all other catastrophes, is if you understand the consequences of a nuclear attack, it actually feeds back into totally different criticalities for your resilience. So it's a more scientific way of looking at it. At the industry level, interestingly, you know, we've talked about the initiative of a radio development. Now, my view is that I'm very pleased that this isn't dependent on satellites because under nuclear war conditions, I think some of the low Earth orbit satellites may not be with us very long, microseconds perhaps. So this initiative, but that can become a community initiative. I would very much like seeing young people and children with these types of radios, bringing it right down into the depths, and perhaps some more engineering work and ways of developing that as a real commercial initiative means it's not just an emergency initiative. I've also had come to me an initiative for really maximising the use of hydroelectric power. And one of the delegates here was showing me the maps for the numbers of dams in each country. These are tremendous, and in my field, post-nuclear attack, these are tremendously important resources. And with industry, I think what we're missing is several things. One is we really haven't had a lot of discussion on innovation in this session. It's been quite a gap. Industry can give us innovation, but industry can also give us what I've explained to you as dual use. And if we're going to bed this into whole societies, the dual use application across the catastrophes for the various plans, but also it's a bit like space now feeds into medicine and many other sciences. So the initiatives should feed back into the everyday community, and that gives profit to industry and technology. We've also missed out the human population side, and we have to link business and industry with human populations. When I've looked at how do you prepare populations for radiation, well, as happened in Japan with Fukushima, how do you prepare them? We miss the fact that the industry and the employers are one of the best bases to really start to trickle feed survival capability, understanding radiation and post-nuclear attack consequences. So we can maximise and mine industry capability as well. Thanks very much. It's not two, but it's always good to break the rules.
Now, that was lots. Very valuable. Udi.
Being hosted at Imperial College and having distinguished representatives of other academic sections, I want to shine the role of those two rows up there. And we're not talking just about human continuity project. We're talking about something which is already being taught at a lot of business schools around the world, but you call it business continuity. Now, there's not going to be business if there are not going to be humans. And please, I know for a fact, I mean, 40 years ago, when I wanted to pursue higher education as a chemical engineer, I could do a PhD in chemical engineering. I haven't used chemical engineering for longer than 10 years, and the rest was business, which I didn't have any formal business education. Today, business schools are all over the world. I mean, I can admire my son, Lee, his husband, who is teaching innovation at IE in Madrid. And I admire him by the number of connections, contacts, the networking of students today is unbelievable. Now, if you incorporate into your programs, and the same goes to you, you are the Dean of the School of Sustainability at Reichman University, the first and best private university in Israel. If you incorporate the notion of let's first make sure that we have humanity and then go through everything else, I think that makes a perfect course in any one of your programs, or at least a homework assignment that will get students excited. And this is something that they will carry on going forward.
Thanks very much. Yossi.
Percy, actually, the idea of known unknowns and unknown knowns was like golden string, and everybody mentioned it. I even called my wife yesterday evening, and she asked me something, and I say, you know, there are a lot of unknowns. So huge input. But what I wanted to say is actually something that I'm bringing from my organization, from Israel Electric, industrial critical organization that is more than 10,000 employees and everything. And actually, it's typical organization built of silos. And one of the problems I dealt mostly with cyber and computerizing is actually those silos are actually undermining totally the ability to put some broad systems and activities, because silos are working like this. And one thing, and I think you actually talk about it, Avi and Persia talk about it, that actually the integration of meetings with different people that become knowledgeable of what the other group are doing. This is actually the key element to create this cooperation. And the reason that it is happening, at least in my experience, is actually the interpretation of what is the meaning of responsibility and accountability. And people actually interpret accountability and responsibility is the only things that they are responsible and they have to do. And they don't understand that actually it doesn't mean that if you are not responsible or accountable for something, you doesn't have to be involved in those things. And I think that one of the things we should do, and I try to do in my company and partially succeeded, is actually to explain people that in the focused local responsibility and accountability they have, there is additional responsibility to actually know their whole environment, the global goals of everything. And it should be explicitly taught and incorporated in those training classes, and I think it will be a key for success.
Thanks very much. Can you pass the microphone back a knight's move, one to the right and two to the left?
Professor Atula Abesekar from Imperial College. What I didn't hear from you today was the power of investors. And we've seen that very well in the green space, where 1/3 of our new investments are coming to green investments. And I wonder whether we could use this as an opportunity to educate the investors, or when I say investors, means you and I, into this financial sector on these things. And I just want to ask the panel as to whether this has been taken care of.
A very good thought. Who on the panel would like to answer it? Or Udi, would you twitched there? Would you like to answer it?
I can try as well.
Okay, and Washington,
I'm still trying to make money. I haven't succeeded yet. Actually, it's quite important. I was thinking about this the other day, and it was also mentioned yesterday. The question of is almost like saying profitability of resilience. So coming up with business models that, on the one hand, help protect while on the other actually present business opportunities. That is pretty difficult, isn't it? And so we are thinking about, when we talk about tools and a multi-stakeholder tools, a lot of what we're talking about here require evidence to convince. How do we convince policymakers? How do we convince the public? How do we convince business that this is something that, at least from their own goals, delivers, but also delivers for the wider society? So I'm a strong believer that the innovation, actually Sally mentioned the innovative aspects of what we're doing here. I go back to this human averseness to hypercomplexity. We at Imperial are quite capable of doing what I call societal modeling. What I mean by that is that we are capable of developing accurate, credible, parametric models that are able to put in there all the stakeholder requirements as to provide the evidence, the thing that we need to convince the stakeholders. Because I think without that, it's going to be a continuation of more talking, isn't it? And this is why I was very much taken by Genome, because to me, it provides that opportunity that I think we have to grab now, but we shouldn't underestimate the complexity of, at least in my mind anyway, what we are thinking of doing. And I do think that that's why universities like Imperial College were invented, to try to help the world deal with this really vexed, hyper-complex problem. Isn't it surprising that the way life works, whether you do infrastructure systems in silos, you can elect to do that, but we are in this room. I'm the civil engineer, so I think I'm the most important person here in terms of building this thing, but the electrical engineer is providing me with lights. The heating wasn't working really well, but yeah, the mechanical engineers do the plumbing and so on. So that is how life works, right? So what I'm suggesting is that we try to see how we can model how life works, because if we can do that and we understand the threats and so on, including the business dimension, then there is something for everybody. Now, is it too much? Is it an impossibility? I don't believe so. So that would be my response. How do we protect while at the same time making it business attractive?
Yes, I personally think you've asked the most important question of the conference. How do we make money out of resilience? So we need a business model that makes money out of resilience. We are in one of the 3 best universities in the country. We ought to be able to come up with an answer. Unless it's the Holy Grail. Udi, have you made money out of resilience?
If you don't lose money, it means that you make money. Okay, so you invest a little bit today and you avoid losing billions sometimes.
Avoiding losing is not the same as making.
I made the point both of the last 2 days that we are all in developing countries right now because we are developing more resources. Nowhere 20 years ago when we were doing a 20-year business plan did we have the new green wave that we're building. My point is, how do we get the investors, instead of putting in the cheapest inverter, to spend 2 to 3% more to put in a hardened inverter that can ride through an EMP pulse? And that really ties to government tax incentives and other things. But we know how to harden these systems. We know the investments are coming because of climate change. Let's build a new green planet that is resilient, with the incremental costs being small compared to the retrofit cost.
Sally next and then Trent.
I don't think that's very hard, particularly if there's some momentum with this organisation, because if you have credits recognised for resilience in the same way as carbon credits. I think if industry gains credits for that in the same way as I've talked about academic research being given actual credits for the contributions to catastrophic levels of resilience, but it needs the branding and the thrust of this as an international operation.
Okay.
Well, I would just echo to a large measure what Terry said and what this gentleman said. There's no question that we have that technology now. I mean, I'm very aware personally of some of the validated technology to harden and make the grid resilient. But we're going to have to realize there's a government factor to that, because a lot of people out there, they want to harden, but there's nobody hiring them to harden. And one of the problems is that the governments have not required a certain standard to be hardened. And, you know, the big grid operators, again, like Terry, they're put at financial disadvantage if the little guys don't have to do it, you know. And the only way to level that field is to have a basic standard. In America, we have this regulatory construct that's insane because it essentially makes it the industry impervious to doing just what's necessary. And we're going to have government to do that. And I guess that goes with my second point earlier today, is that we have to help the people understand this importance, because as a politician, and I guess that's pretty much at the bottom of the totem pole, sometimes we don't see the light until we feel the heat of our constituents. And when the constituents, and they intrinsically recognize this. I've been on programs where people tell me, oh, that EMP thing, we got more feedback from the people than anything else we did. The people can understand the significance of this. And if we can help the people, if we can do two things, if we can help the people understand the significance of the issue, and then make sure that we have that goal, a specific goal of hardening. And my final thought is that, you know, Avi is so good at keeping the key objective, the mission in mind, and that's to help all of us live and be free and pursue our dreams and walk in the light of freedom a little longer. And I thought that Lord James was especially the idea of making 2 points, you know, something specific. So we need to keep the goal in mind, and we need to have proactive specifics, and we need policy that requires us to harden, and then the industry and the investors will respond.
Okay.
Sure. I think the point made about the financial incentive is the single most important thing. As a congressman mentioned, legislatively, for the standards to be legislated and required means that the people who are legislating have that pressure, but the pressure comes both from the people, but it also comes from the industry. And in my own personal experience, I mean, just now I'm texting back and forth with a senator in Texas, a state senator who's tried for 6 years to pass legislation that would start to just study the problem and make requirements. And I don't think it's going to pass. And part of it is industry opposition. And if there's just some way to have the rest of the industry be more like the gentlemen and ladies that are sitting here from industry, and just brainstorm an incentive. Those of us that have been trying to raise the alarm about this, rather than being looked at like pests, we could be the best friend of the industry to help with cost recovery and justification. That's the single biggest thing I think we need. As soon as there's a financial incentive, then it changes. And the last thing I'll just mention is there is thankfully now at least one educational product that's out there that tells this story in a way that's not apocalyptic. And it's a documentary called Grid Down, Power Up. So at griddownpowerup.com is a film narrated by Dennis Quaid. It's done in a very thoughtful way. And it has a whole bunch of tools on the website, the participate button that allows people to do exactly what the congressman just mentioned, to exert that pressure. But if we could just get, again, the financial part figured out with the industry, and this seems to be the most perfect venue for that to happen. So
I'm going to come to Lawrence, but then I'm going to come back to you, sir, to answer your own question.
Yes,
Okay, Lawrence first.
So finance, investment, Absolutely. There are some mechanisms which do exist already. They're not particularly eloquent. They're not particularly well known. So, for example, the insurance industry. Now, from my own perspective, running government services, operations, infrastructure, military bases across Europe, for example, you bid for a long-term contract, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You have to run that contract. To run that contract, even for a large global organization, you need to finance that contract. The financing of that contract gets underwritten by insurance. If you don't do things which to the insurers, be it, the big global insurers, AIG, or the brokers like Marsh and Willis Towers, etc. Sustainability, green finance, that is coming to the fore. And in the EU, there are lots of, policy initiatives, policy mandates now, which means that if you are not doing the right thing from a green and sustainability perspective, then wherever you are borrowing that money from, investment funds, pension funds, et cetera, may not be allowed to be marketed and may actually be more expensive to finance those contracts. So we, as Serco, needing to fund a 20-year contract, and roughly how that contract is going to last for maybe 3-5 years. Once you go beyond 3 or 5 years, it's unknown unknowns, and anything could happen. Society could change, whatever. So the financing of those contracts underwritten by insurance is a mechanism which is well known, commercially known, internationally known, but it's not a particularly good finance for resilience. We all know about resilience. There is business continuity. There are ISO standards. There are ISO standards for resilient cities, resilient societies, for all those things, but they are not, and again, I think this is maybe something for the human continuity, they are not brought together in a very cohesive or coherent way that says, well, yes, we are green. Yes, we are reducing our carbon. Yes, we are using renewable energy. Therefore, we meet investment criteria and we can get insurance and borrow money relatively cheaply. Resilience needs to fit into that pot as well. And if you fit it into a joined up and integrated view, sustainability and resilience as two sides of the same coin, then and get that picked up by insurers, that's a mechanism.
Okay. Thank you. And then, have I been missing you all along? I have been missing you all along. So you can come next.
James, let me just interject something briefly, because before we lose the thread of this discussion, a lot of what people are bringing up points about is we have all of these capabilities, but how do we actually get them implemented? How do we start seeing the societal changes? How do we convince the insurance companies to add this element in? We spent 2 years working with Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, the insurers, the reinsurers, and the issue was there's no direct, simple connection between what one company does for resilience to black sky hazards and if a black sky hazard happens, we'll be out of business anyway. That problem, that contradiction has been solved by the green revolution, because insurance companies now recognize they have a public and a social responsibility to include that element. The key point is this: influencing insurance companies, influencing public policy requires a forcing function. The only forcing function that's going to be big enough is if there is a global scale project which includes the most respected corporations, academic institutions, government agencies worldwide from most of the major countries, that then sits down, begins laying out these suggestions, and with that extraordinary credibility, begins discussions with the public policy people, with governments, with insurance companies and corporations. That's the fundamental idea behind the Human Continuity Project. That's what can bring the credibility that's needed.
Thank you.
I just want to say maybe a final part to my question. We have a live example of this in the financial services sector, where we had a crash in 2008, 2009. And, oh, is that better? Yeah, sorry. Congressman, new regulations came in. A lot of the financial sector had to implement them. But the people who were successful were the ones who actually took it as an opportunity, as a business opportunity to improve their own way of doing business. And if we convince the business and the corporations that this is an opportunity, I think we have a much better chance of success. That's my final thought on that.
I agree with that. Yes.
Yeah, on my part, I'm kind of was going back a little bit because when we were talking about the known unknowns and the silos and all those kind of things. One of the issues that we have in there is because of these natural firewalls that we have built in between organizations and stuff. And a lot of these things are driven, and we keep coming up again and again, and we haven't talked a lot about it here, but the word keeps coming up when we look at policies and regulations and stuff. Some of those firewalls are built in there because regulations require separation. And the other issue was, like, Jenny came up and asked me yesterday about how do we trust new technology, right? How do we implement it? I can say I've got this new technology, but how do I get people to trust it? AI, how do I get people to trust it? And I think part of the issue comes down into there. You brought up how do we need to trust the people more, you know, and not just keep everything so secret. So part of these firewalls that we have that doesn't allow us to actually communicate back and forth between there comes down to a couple of things. One is a lot of times we've built regulatory firewalls in there. You're not allowed to talk across industry about that. And then the second part is the whole trust thing. You know, I don't trust this organization. I don't trust the water plant with the information from the electric grid. Like, I can't talk across there. So, you know, and then the whole cybersecurity thing drives that even more, right? I mean, cyber just drives us all to not trust anybody, right? I mean, we're not allowed to. So I think to solving some of those issues is how do we build that trust? And then how do we work with our regulators and our policymakers to maybe reduce those firewalls that sits in between those things? Because I think that's what keeps a lot of this movement from moving forward.
Can I make a comment about that?
Thanks. Is it Sally first or Persia first? Persia first. Okay.
You make a good comment regarding the silos and how we get past those. And yep, that's going to definitely mean building trust, something that we do. I found that, you know, if we put our heads together, like, you know, we've seen here, we can find a way. During the pandemic, we did something in our business EOC and our BEOC. Well, I did something. I called it sector analysis. You know, what did I do that for? Well, we had about a little over 1,100 companies across 11 sectors, a little over 1,300 across 11 sectors, business industry. And you can imagine that nobody really wanted to communicate exactly how bad it was. Fair? Well, I reached out to our partners and I said, because understanding that we had to find a way to communicate, we had to find a way to get some type of situational awareness, us to them and them to us, public, private, and my job as the liaison to try to act as a conduit. So I put out to our partners that if you will share information with us with no need to give your business name or your name, but speak to me about the sector, your expectations, warnings, limitations, issues, shortages. What ended up happening was every single day, somebody across the sectors was sharing something with us in North Carolina without having to give their name or their company or whomever, but they were saying things like, hey, in rail, we anticipate this happening. by the way, in transportation, we think the truckers are going to strike for these reasons and those labor problems. Oh, we're seeing toilet paper go at an alarming rate. You know, we think that this healthcare issue of people not going in for regular physicals and regular medications is going to catch up with us. These are people that we're talking across sectors, and I didn't have to give any names. But rolling that up every day, it became this report I did, giving that to my boss, and he was briefing our governor. What it allowed the governor to do was to get ahead a bit on some of those problems and make even a little bit better operational decisions on his next step through the pandemic, since we were all trying to find our way. But understanding what was going on in the retail, across the supply chain, what the farmers and growers were suffering from, what these healthcare folks were saying, and kind of getting a spectrum. You know, it's not perfect, but to your point, the regulations and the things that hold us back, in necessity, human beings find a way. And that's what we did. We tried to, at least, to get a little bit more, a little closer.
Right, and I was thinking about that, and I was going to make within that, was in crisis mode, we say, let's suspend the rules.
That's what we do.
Okay. How do we get ahead of that? Can we, A, tweak the rules now? Or B, like in the event of me with the radio and working with the FCC and spectrum harvesting and all those things that I've talked about, I'm trying to get a waiver with the FCC, right? That says, hey, in this emergency, President needs to declare disaster, whatever, let's suspend the rules. But let me have that suspension of rules in place before the event versus when the event occurs. Now I've got to come to you and say, we need to suspend the rules, right? So maybe two pieces of that. How do we start to work those rules down now? And how do we put in place those things that allow us to forecast that we're going to need to suspend some rules in an emergency?
Okay.
Excellent.
Before I call on Sally, I'm going to call on Levy.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a practical question. I joined the council 2 years ago, and I've been having a lot of conversations about our future continuity. I want to leave the door today with action points. For me, action points is, what am I doing tomorrow morning when I open my computer and I say, okay, so it was a nice summit. Everyone shared a lot of knowledge and it's fantastic. But if we take the Human Continuity Project, okay, Avi was inviting you guys to join. The power of the group, we see it now in Israel when we are having difficult problems with the government. The power of the group is incredible. So we have the group of MBAs, the group of doctors, the group of the retirees, the group and the group and the group, and the power of the group is amazing. So if I know everyone who sits here, because I've been managing this list for a few months now, if we take all the companies that are sitting here, we already have the universities backing us up with the Human Continuity Project. We have Reichman, we have Imperial College, we have a few companies that join us. Would you join us? I mean, because we have a plan. The plan is ready. It's just a matter of now having a group behind us. So you're talking about changing policy? This will take ages. You know, I was working for the government. I know how time that those things takes. But if we will be a big group, this will take us one step forward. So if you allow me to send you our documents and say, will you join me? And you take those documents ahead and talk to your superiors, your teams, your doctors, your whatever, this will make a change. Because if not, it was a nice to have conference. And maybe we'll do another one next year, but you know, maybe we will, maybe we won't. So think about that.
Thank you.
That's my ask.
Sally.
Yes, and partly responding to that as well, and picking up the commercial areas. Look, I would recommend that once you have your structure formulated, that you talk with the finance sector in New York and within London, and think about the way in which you could use catastrophe bonds, and not the catastrophe bonds that are considered as just an insurance product, but think of your sovereign wealth funds and the use of a catastrophe bond that's a banking and an insurance instrument, because what I'm suggesting pushes your initiative into a cycle in the private sector, which is a lot faster than governments. And with the catastrophe bonds, what you're both doing is getting investment into bonds which will assist countries and major industries with catastrophic event fast financial recoveries, but you are also investing those bonds in companies that are doing resilience hardening. So in that way, you've actually got a closed cycle. And I think that it's a new type of product that the financial sectors in New York and in London could be interested in.
Chris, you're grinning there. Are you going to agree with Sally's idea?
Yes. And I want to follow.
No, sorry, wrong Chris. Chris Trainer I was looking at.
Okay.
So I agree with Chris.
Right.
I do agree, and the catastrophe bond, you know, is a great concept. But the reason I'm smiling is I work a lot with infrastructure investors, and infrastructure investors invest to the rules that are made. So fundamentally, getting the policy and the regulation right will draw the money into resilience. And we have a perfect example at the moment in the UK with wastewater overflows. The reason that we have not invested in wastewater overflows is it has not been a priority, and you won't fix it overnight. So it's about getting the rules right and understanding consequences of the rules that you put in place, and then you will get efficient tools from the banking and the insurance industry. And the problem at the moment is they come at such a big cost because there are too many unknowns. And so if we can narrow that down and increase the number of knowns, we will get efficient products from the banking and insurance sector.
A point Sir David Higgins made on Monday, I think. Chris.
Yes. So I think it's just a related idea that maybe we want to borrow from. So we talked about there's some structures out there that we could look at, like catastrophic bonds and the motivations for the wastewater. Another one might be to what we need. Basically, we need to create a market demand signal for resilience, right? That's what we need. Maybe a related, fairly closely related, is safety, right? So think about seat belts in cars, right? That was a sticking point. No one wanted the seat belts. The manufacturer said, "Oh, it'll drive up costs," and no one wants it. And then finally, there was sort of a forcing function. They were made requirement, and now there's a market. There are people that buy cars because they're safe. Not everybody, but there's enough people there's lines of cars now that that's their pitch. This car over here might be super fast and look cool, and there's a cohort of people that want that. But then there's one that's like, man, this thing's got every airbag and the backup safety cameras and everything, and there's a demand signal for that. I think that it's possible. It's a harder problem when we get to infrastructure resilience. It's sort of a tragedy of the commons problem, because if I'm thinking about, I want to buy my car, well, that's an asset I own as an individual. I'm making a decision about that, and I'm a soccer dad, and I say, well, I want a safe van for my kids, but I'm going to buy that. It's not as obvious to say, how can I want the infrastructure around me to be resilient, right? Because I don't own it. So there's that step I'm not sure about, but I think we could borrow from that paradigm from sort of individual assets that are and insurance is part of it. So car insurance is lower if you have a safe car. Or house insurance is lower if you have a burglar alarm system and adequate fire protection, and et cetera, like, so there's ways of incentivizing things, but how do we do it in a more public shared space? That seems to be the challenge, but maybe we can at least borrow from some of these ideas that are all kind of swirling around, but maybe we can coalesce a few of them.
Okay, hold on. Right, okay, you next. then you, then Tom. And although the clock says 22 minutes past 9, it's wrong. We finish this panel in 7 minutes.
Okay.
So bear that
I'll
in
be
mind
brief.
as you're speaking. Keep it brief, would you?
I'll be brief. I think I'm chairing the next session. So Deep Chana from Imperial College. I'm also soon to be director of the Defence Innovation Accelerator for NATO, called Diana. It's really interesting hearing this conversation, actually. But one thing struck me earlier on, we were talking about this idea of politicians feeling the heat, if you like, from the electorate. And lots of the discussion here seems to get to one point here, in that I think there's a vacuum of political thought leadership. I mean, I think politics in democracies has always been a little bit about asking and polling the people for what they want right now, but also maybe proposing, putting something new on the table and convincing them of that idea. In a data proliferated world where it's easier to poll people, I feel we've got into a lazy state of democracy where it's far easier to poll the people and respond to that rather than to take the step of putting out a proposition to convince. This is the forcing function, I think, that you were talking about, and it is missing. And without that forcing function, we have a deep crisis in our democratic systems, because effectively democracy now looks like it's being executed through this polling activity. And that's a very safe space for a Democrat to live in, right? Because you can just say, I did what the people told me. But you're not then in a position to say, well, actually, I think this is a better idea, and I'm going to go out and convince people of it. Without that, policy won't change, industry won't change because regulations won't change, and you end up with a kind of multi-faceted stasis where everybody knows these kind of problems exist. We've studied them for decades. We know the world is becoming more interconnected. We know these things are an issue, but who is actually convincing people that this is a priority? Going back to this issue around water in the UK, most people in the UK have not thought it's a priority because they've not been convinced of the argument, because no one has put the argument on the table, and that leads to decades worth of underinvestment. But just a point.
It was Margaret Thatcher who termed the word followership, which is what you're talking about, I think. Yes. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jace Kuriakos. I'm from University of Manchester. I want to mention about standards, guidances, metrics, and indicators for resilience. So I work with the power distribution network operators in the UK. They are doing lots of resilience measures for flood protection, vegetation management, storms, so on and so forth. And they all do slightly differently. One of the issues is, if you can't measure the resilience activities, then there is an issue. So we need metrics so that we can measure the resilience. We only know a specific resilience action is effective only after an event, whether it's working or not. So it's really important to have that in place. That will help also the investors, other people. Okay, there are some standards, there are some metrics that we can measure, so that can influence others. So that's one of the things I'm working on.
That's very helpful. So in the same way as there can be standards for cybersecurity or Cyber Plus in the UK, Lihi, you've moved away from Tom.
I'm sorry, I went to Danny.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
Can go back.
Thank you. Sorry, carry on.
I would like to emphasize the importance of technical standards on, I would say, the practices of the industry. We were quite successful other areas, changing the best practices of the industry towards different directions. For example, in EMC area, today every electronic product, even the most simple, is has built-in EMC because it must meet various standards, CE directive in Europe and other directives. I think EIS should work closely with standard setting organization like ISO to change the best practices of the industry in the right direction. Specifically, the world is now moving towards green energy, which goes net zero by 2050, whatever. And if the right technical standard will include the resiliency that is required, the EMP requirement, whatever, the problem will be solved. As simple as that.
Okay.
So this should be the main effort.
Thank you very much. Now, Tom, and then I'm going to look at the panel to see if there is anybody who absolutely must say something, and then we absolutely must stop.
Hi, thank you. So we need to apply value-based pricing to infrastructure systems. We intuitively know the societal value of the products and services coming from infrastructure, and this leads us to apply price regulation on a sectoral basis. We then mistakenly equate the value, the revenue generated from the sale of infrastructure products and services such as electricity as the value of the infrastructure. The value of the infrastructure includes everything that infrastructure enables, not just what we allow the operators of the infrastructure to capture. We allow them to capture a small percentage of the value that they are enabling through the provision of infrastructure. We then expect them to use that to fund the resilience of that infrastructure, even though the value of that resilience is societal. So we undervalue infrastructure, we undervalue resilience. The business case then for investment in resilience doesn't add up, and we underinvest in both infrastructure and resilience. That is my theory, and we need to apply value-based pricing as they do in pharma to demonstrate the theoretical value of infrastructure to the societies it enables. And until we do that, we can't get investment in resilience to add up.
Please would you write that down and send it to me in an email, because it sounds as though there may be a solution inside that.
Can you add to that, please, to your equation, the underserved populations, because that's going to be your problem. Underserved population or historically underserved, that's going to, or special needs and assisted needs, that's going to be variables for you.
Very important point, which you made right at the beginning of the conference. Okay, is there anybody who on this panel absolutely must say something, or they will die without it? Washington and Sally.
Training, scaling. If we lose sight on the human skills layer, that in itself is a significant issue.
Okay. Avi, I'm not sure you can, because you've got the final word of this conference anyway. So I'm going to, Trent.
Well, I was just struck by what this gentleman over here said. You know, we can either poll the people and try to respond and give them back what they want to hear, but sometimes we need to tell people what they need to hear, what we want them to hear. And there's a quote, and it's my final word to the conference. It says, "Let all the ends that you aim at in life be your countries, your gods, and the truth. Be noble, and the noblest lies in other men, sleeping but never dead, will rise in majesty to meet thine own." And I think if we have a clear clarion message that this is something that's important for society and for the people of the world, that the people will respond if we have a noble, clear message. And I think I hope we leave with that in mind. Thank you.
I like a noble, clear message. Sally.
A final word of encouragement, actually. Look, I've spent about 20 years with international media during high threat events, and you get the feel of the way populations and politicians are responding. And I consider that the increasing likelihood of nuclear war and the messages that are coming out about conflict will actually suddenly, it is a step jump change you will see in focusing on resilience absolutely strongly. So if you can position yourself fairly quickly, I think the momentum will, rather than you pushing, you will have a big pull of momentum. So that's my encouragement.
A positive note on which to end a brilliant panel's contribution. You've all worked very hard. Thank you very much indeed. End of panel.
while, so why don't we take just a 10-minute break, stretch your legs, go to the bathroom. We'll be back by quarter of. The next panel will be James. James will be back on the next panel. Avi, Lawrence, and chaired by Professor Chana.
should we wait a few more minutes to get the rest in? There's still some people in coffee, I think, so.
I'll give a final cattle talk.
Maybe, yeah.
All right, yeah, I'll do the picture first.
Okay, all right, fantastic. Okay, everyone. I believe we're in the position of being the panel that kind of closes the show. I understand you've had a very, very good conference. I was fascinated. Apologies, I couldn't be here for a lot of it, but just joining that last session or listening into that last session was absolutely fascinating. And I think it could probably we could probably keep discussing these topics for another few days yet. But at any rate, my name is Professor Deep Chana. For those of you who don't know me, I am the director of Imperial College's Institute for Security Science and Technology. I'm also the co-director of the Center for Financial Technology, which sits in the business school. A physicist originally by training, and I've done various things in the tech startup world over the last 10 years. I will also be taking a position on the 2nd of May as the managing director for the Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic, which is a project that some of you would have heard of under the banner Diana. In fact, trying to do achieve many of the things that we've just talked about here in terms of pushing forward the dual use agenda and trying to address some of these problems on resilience. It's a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon, or sorry, this morning, and to be joined by a great set of panelists. I think we've got about half an hour and we're already going to overrun, I can see from the start time, but I guess that's okay because we're at the end of the day. So what I thought I might do just very quickly is just have the panel give a few words of introduction about themselves and what they do, and then I will introduce the topic, and then maybe we'll get the panel to say a few words, make a few points around the topic, and then open the floor for any questions, discussions after that. So if I might start at the far end and then work our way this way.
Ladies first. No, don't worry. Good morning. For those who don't know me, Lawrence Marzell, and I'm currently leading for Serco, a EU Green Deal flagship project on renovation and development of green building neighbourhoods, which are both sustainability for neighbourhoods and communities, but also, very aligned to this topic, resilient as well. And prior to that, I was 16 years with Serco, leading their UK and European research and innovation. Madam Ambassador.
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you. My name is Giselle Morales. I am the ambassador of Nicaragua to United Kingdom. And I am very honored to participate in this summit about global resilience, about building global resilience. Because I am not an expert on any of the topics that you touched, but I have an advantage over many of you. I come from a country that suffers the climate crisis we live, and as many developing countries, and we are looking from our perspective, how can we get a local and combine local and global resilience, that those priorities from the local and the global can be, there is a encounter and how to ensure we advance resilience simultaneously. So.
Thank you. I'm John McDermott from the University of York. I'm a safety guy. I've worked on safety of complex computer-controlled systems for approaching 40 years. Over the last 5 years, I've run a program funded by the Lloyd's Register Foundation on regulation and assurance of autonomous systems and robotics, particularly those including machine learning. I've also been fortunate over the years to be involved in a number of investigations of accidents and incidents. So I've actually seen resilience at first hand, how people respond to incidents, and hope I can bring some of that learning and understanding to this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. There are probably not many people who don't know who I am in this conference, but just for those few, I'm leading the Electric Infrastructure Security Council, which is focused on basically acting as a catalyst to encourage and help develop the critical plans, needs, tools, capabilities associated with dealing with extreme hazards and extreme disaster situations.
I'm James Arbuthnot. I'm in the House of Lords in the United Kingdom, former Defence Minister, former Chairman of the Defence Select Committee in the House of Commons, and in the House of Lords, former Chairman of the Risk Select Committee and general all-round geek.
That's fantastic. I think I need a T-shirt with that written on it. General all-round geek, I think that's a great introduction. Probably characterizes many people in this room, and I say that very happily. Okay, so in this session, I think we were touching on some of this in the last session anyway, right? So we often hear this phrase about thinking globally and then acting locally. Especially when we think about the huge moves in the last few decades in interconnectivity that we have with our digital systems, the highly interdependent world that we live in, which I think events such as the conflict in Ukraine are showing us. Some of the theory is being proven out in evidence to people who maybe perhaps didn't believe how interconnected things were. We see food insecurity, energy, finance, and all of these things coming together to play some role in this scenario. And when we think about other big problems like pandemics and of course climate change, these are all issues which actually compel us to do this thing, right? To think globally and then to act locally. But how can we best ensure that we are undertaking that kind of simultaneous thinking, if you like, rather than holding what some people have, I think, which is a kind of cognitive dissonance around this subject, which is that local resilience and local prosperity is often at odds with the objectives of kind of a global good. And people find, I think, that they're often struggling to prioritize between the two. Is it a question of prioritization, or is there a way of actually getting alignment between these things? I'll open this up to the panel. Anybody who wants to go first? Well, maybe we'll start at the end. Yeah, I could see you raring to go. Yeah, go for it. I think you do. I don't know if you have, there's one just here, right? Yes.
Thank you, Deep. This is something that really chimes well with me. So a little bit of an anecdote. 10, 12 years ago, when I was leading Serco's bid to run the UK's Emergency Planning College, which, for those who don't know, has a responsibility for training and exercising policy and doctrine for local resilience forums and how first responders, agencies respond, plan, prepare, and respond to events. Now, I wrote, and it was just at the time where the critical national infrastructure, nobody knew what the critical national infrastructure was. It was the time of the UK's first counter-terrorist strategy contest. We'd also just launched the first UK national security strategy, and the CNI was like this abstract concept that nobody knew about. I wrote a thought piece, just a short one, which I'm happy to share, which was about the private sector's role in resilience and protecting, being involved in responsibility of risk, etc., for the critical national infrastructure. But I also said, well, whether it's a power plant or sewage works or a chemical plant, whatever, that piece of CNI also is critical local infrastructure. It sits and resides within a community in a neighborhood, and it has an impact, it has a footprint on that community and neighborhood, the people who work there, the economic well-being of that community, and also, its influence. If you think about the big car factories, think about the coal mines and so on, these were massive parts of the resilience and the well-being of that community. But as you say, we are now connected world, everything is just-in-time supply chains, and we are affected locally by global shocks. But to bring this whole thing round to the point, now in sustainability, where we are looking at more circular, more sustainable procurement, circular economy, nature-based solutions, and so on, in response to a global requirement, actually putting in place things like local district heating and cooling systems, like focused on circular economy, you know, making sure that your distance that you buy things from is as short as possible, producing, sustaining locally. Actually, we are coming full circle back to critical local infrastructure. And so I would say that actually this is a great thing for deconnecting some parts of what was a very connected world.
Fantastic, thank you. Giselle, and from your perspective as well, I think it'd be really interesting from that country perspective that you have, which I think often people don't get it. How does the world look like? How does this issue look like from that perspective?
I think I'm going to go, like he said, from the European perspective. So I'm now go from the developing world perspective.
Yeah, I think it would be really good to hear that, because I think also sometimes these topics are dominated from certain lenses and through certain lenses and perspectives.
I don't. When you started, you said, "Shall we prioritize?" You know, what is how we approach. I don't think there is there should be a conflict. I think we shouldn't prioritize, because we live in it's just one world. We don't have alternative realities. We believe that dialogues and exchanges like this are essential. And it's urgent for an existential imperative that we live in. We think that if you listen to us and we listen to you, if we share what we have accomplished and you share what you have researched, what you have innovated, and build this cooperation from the reality. You know, the previous panel was about getting real. So this is getting real, having this dialogue, to listen to each other and to build on that. And then I think we might have a goal. And because, as you said, you know, all these devastating events, climate events, extreme climate events, are kind of the new normal. So we need to talk about that. And we are impacted every place we live. Of course, you know, developing countries are more affected because we are in this area of the world where the heating is, where we get warmer than you. So that's, but everything is affecting, because we live in an interdependent world, and it's affecting supply chain. The same as war is affecting supply chain, but climate change is affecting supply chain. It's not, climate crisis is not an impending threat or a hypothetical problem of future generations. Or other countries' problem. It's our problem. It's human problem. And it's here, and it's now, and affect everyone one way or another. So I think, you know, you have been discussing things that are music to our ears, how to get involved the private. We have been advocated for private investors to become green, to invest in green infrastructure, and we doing things that I think we were talking up here with Lawrence before we started, and he said, I think you are more resilient than we are, and in a way it is true. We have nature, we have biodiversity, we have people who is accustomed to be resilient, to have learned to be resilient. So we have that wealth, and I think we have that knowledge, ancestral knowledge, that need to be looked at. And if we do that and we share that with the world, and the world accept that is a value in that, I think we can, maybe we can avoid the global black sky. Thank you.
Thank you. John.
Thanks. Let me do this in more of an engineering perspective on sort of local versus global. My view is we want to be able to make decisions as locally as possible, but there's some things that we can't. So, you know, choosing what systems to keep on in a hospital you can and must do locally, but actually trying to reinitialize position, navigation and timing systems has to be done on a much broader basis, at least national, if not more widely. I said I've seen some things, and I've seen some things that work well and some things that don't. And I would say the issue here is about knowledge and authority. And you actually want the decision-making authority to be where the knowledge is to make good decisions. And to me, you know, a metric for good organization is how close in the organizational structures the knowledge and authority actually are. And if they're a long way apart, you have a problem and you need to change your organizational design, or you need to put in place very effective communication to make sure those who have the authority so you can actually make the decision. That sounds quite abstract, but you know, I've worked with the military, for example, and they actually changed the duty holder construct as a response to problems that have occurred. So I think that's very pragmatic. I could talk about some more engineering things, but let me just stick to that bit about local versus global. But you have to design it. You can't let it happen. Thanks.
Avi. You're going to take a long run up.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. It's not local versus global, and as you said, John, the decision making needs to be close coupled with knowledge. In both of these areas, however, there's a fundamental problem, because when you deal with the complexity that now represents all of the interconnected infrastructures and supply chains that keep us alive, there's nowhere you can go to find all of the knowledge that you need. And the decision makers are probably the last people to even, as you were saying before, Professor Chana, even understand that this is an issue that they need to grapple with. So I think we see great examples of the interdependencies, both local to global and global to local. Just looking at history, one of the most famous and obvious examples was Hurricane Maria, which struck the island of Puerto Rico. And one of the most noticeable consequences for the rest of the world was that hospitals were struggling to deal with the fact that they no longer had sufficient saline solution bags, because it turned out that a critical major supplier was on the island of Puerto Rico. And of course, the opposite is more than true. We see what happened with the recent international food crisis because of the war going on in Ukraine. So local events affect the global reality. The global reality then affects local reality everywhere. But this is certainly not only a negative story. It can be a very positive story. We were speaking before the panel started about the impetus behind Genome, and I'm not sure if everyone here had the opportunity to hear the short briefing that Dr. Ganani, you gave, I think, on the very first day of the conference. But fundamentally, where this came from was the need to change the reality that we're currently dealing with. That we live in a world that keeps 8 billion of us alive because of the very high efficiency, closely coupled infrastructures, supply chains that span all sectors and all nations today. And yet, as this entire system becomes more and more tightly coupled, the reality is when you deal with a very complex, closely coupled system, as that continues to evolve, and we have all of the requirements to continue to drive its complexity and the level of coupling. It would be very surprising if there is not, as in any organic system, a sudden failure. And unlike the biological organic systems, our civilization does not have, for example, a systemic resilience system like an immune system. That's a problem. And there's no opportunity to reverse the direction, right? We can't go backwards from interdependency to independency. That won't work and keep 8 billion of us alive. So the only real alternative is to artificially do what nature has done in the biological world. We are going to have to find a way to build systemic resilience for the world. So just briefly, to provide an overarching context for an example of an opportunity to deal with this, about 5 years ago, I think there was an event here in London, which was an academic conference that we were co-hosting with involvement, I think, of some of the universities that are represented here. And at that event, there was a lot of discussion of the very tight global interdependencies. Tom Dolan, I think you were at that. You were at that conference. And the work that is being done in academic circles and the remarkable chains of interdependency that no one could have possibly imagined. As I recall, there was discussion of a certain fountain in downtown London, which caused the failure of the underground when there was a leak in the fountain. So one key example, there is simply no way to deal with this continually tightening, expanding system without finding some way to understand it, analyze it. So genome represents a very novel new technology that is now in early development to create the situational awareness involvement and use an AI techniques to present decision makers with options based on hundreds of thousands of assessments within the modeling system for what would be the consequences of different actions taken by different operators in different sectors and different locations. And it's going to be critical. And this is not new, the understanding that this is going to be critical. What is a little bit new is this is a novel approach to solve the problem without requiring very complex simulations. But I think it's an opportunity, and Nicaragua, I think, represents a great example because on the one hand, the world does not know, without having an interconnected system that can, machine-based system that can help us understand it, where, if there's serious disruption in Nicaragua, where the rest of the world will start hurting. And also, in the context and on the positive side of the equation, it's not clear until we have more of this kind of detailed machine-assisted global understanding where there may be unique opportunities in Nicaragua to build either resilience or other kinds of value that the world needs.
I think this is the reason why these different perspectives are so important, because if we're building these models and we don't capture those perspectives, then actually, again, are we just building local models that really have no global significance? James, I just wondered if you could just chime in on some of this. And actually just listening to Avi, you know, this idea of creating sort of almost a biological system out of our infrastructure, which mimics nature and has a kind of, as you said, some immunity, you know, is that going to come from the ground up, or is that going to come from the top down? Are we thinking political leadership that then says this is how it will be and create collaboration? Is that a busted flush to wait for that to happen, or do we actually just build it and then let the system respond? This concerns me lots, right? Because where do you attack this problem?
Of course, there are other potential outcomes than the Genome Project or the Human Continuity Project, which are not so attractive. Prince Philip was once asked, if you were going to be resurrected, what sort of animal would you like to come back as? And he said he wanted to come back as a disease, because he said the main problem in the world is its overpopulation. And it is the overpopulation of the world that requires all these interconnected machines that keep us operating at 8 billion population. And the longer this goes on, the more likely it is, I think, to become a self-correcting mechanism. So unless we do take action and take it into our own hands, my suspicion is that nature, through the sun or through human disagreements, will deal with it itself. We've had, frankly, a dreadful 3 years with COVID, Ukraine, climate change, creating huge problems across the world. And all of those have added to the problems of inflation and a cost of living crisis that is affecting us all. And you don't see any sign of political solutions to these problems. They just seem to be getting worse. My solution, thinking globally and acting locally, is to talk to my friends. What more can you do? Well, you can talk to your enemies as well, and that helps. But what worries me most about this dreadful 3 years is that we give every appearance of failing to take advantage of a good crisis. You really need to take advantage of something like COVID. When COVID came in, the population were unhappy with the level of preparedness, and they tried to step up to the plate to improve things and got rebuffed because our level of preparedness was not able to use all of these volunteers. So the population wants something better, and the opportunity to give them something better is now, and we've got to take advantage of that, it seems.
That's brilliant, James. And actually, you bring up a very important point here, which is that when we talk about locality, we shouldn't just be talking about, of course, geographic or spatial locality. We should be thinking temporally as well. And increasingly, it seems that we're very adept at rapidly forgetting recent events and replacing them with even more recent events. So even our very recent history, I would argue, COVID, the war in Afghanistan, another classic example of that. Many, many lessons to be learned there. And I wonder if we're doing a good enough job of extracting some of that to figure out how we think on multiple scales simultaneously. I wanted to open this up now to the floor. I'm sure there's many opinions and thoughts around this on the floor already. So any questions? How long have we got, roughly? Another 10, if we go for another? 10 minutes or so? Okay, great. Let's start down here, and then I'll move on to you.
Got a question from our online audience, which says, what is the penultimate barrier that is preventing action? So we can all move beyond talking and talk instead about what needs to be done and start doing it.
So this is a great question. I think let's get a couple of responses from the panel, but really this is a question about action, right? Okay, and we touched on this earlier on. We really got to start doing stuff. So what is it that we can, seeing as we're closing this conference up, let's get some tangibles. What do we think we can do? And they don't have to be perfect answers, right? Just stuff that could actually happen.
Okay, good question. And my view, coming from an operational background, and before that, an advertising background, so the communication and winning over hearts and minds is very important, is that we need to, for the moment, ignore the politicians. There will always be policy, legislation, vested interests which stand in the way of any of this change, and you need a lot of money and a lot of influence and a lot of time to affect change in that way. So, and I would say this, having run quite a few EU Horizon projects, living labs, where pilots in another term, where you get a set of coalition of the willing together, public sector, private sector, academia, citizens, and so on, and you do it. So, for example, the Human Continuity Project. So actually, you know, we find a like-minded city or region or council or country, and you know, we put into practice what we are talking about, and we make it work, and you use that as an evidence-based approach to start influencing opinion and winning over hearts and minds. So, and you know, going back to the previous panel, once politicians see that there is a groundswell and they have an insurance policy to the decisions that they make, i.e. this works and the people like it, then you can start to influence opinion more.
Okay. John, I think you might want to jump in here, right?
Sure. Thank
Giselle, you want to say something as well? So, but if John says something, and then we'll go to Giselle, and then I'll return to the question here.
I think one of the things that would help overcome the barriers is giving people some clarity on what might be done, and this needs to be done internationally. So I might suggest perhaps the National Academy of Engineering in the US and the Royal Academy of Engineering here would work together on a joint study to try to produce some recommendations. I think we could review quite a number of existing incidents and reports, you know, at various scales, what happened in Haiti, which had some benefits, but real problems of managing. I think more than 140 different organizations were involved in that. What happened at Fukushima, the things I was involved in is air traffic control outages in the UK, which were actually managed very well. So actually try to learn from what's been done, and perhaps looking at contingency plans that we think have been done well. Then I would think looking at a major foreseeable event, for example, the impact of a solar flare on electrical power, and say how we think that should be managed, and trying to derive from that action plans for different levels of organization. I think doing something like that, actually showing some leadership, here's some practical things that can be done, would be worthwhile. And you know, I suggest, you know, 2 major engineering organizations to lead that, because I think they have the reputation, the visibility, the political clout to do that. Of course, you'd want to draw in people from other countries around the world, but they could exhibit the leadership, I think, that would make the difference.
Fantastic. Giselle.
I'm just going back to the option of crisis.
If you just talk to the top, I think. It's probably
okay,
better.
crisis and opportunity. And we have had in 2020, 2 major events, climate events that cost us like 7% of our GDP. So and this last year we had 2 more that cost us 3% of our GDP. So how we do it, how we manage to overcome that. And I think it's all about thinking in a systemic. So we cannot put like band-aids. We need to work everything. So from international perspective, we have advocating for unconditional cooperation and climate finance. We believe the money is there. We believe the science is there. The problem is how we share it. And that, in answering the question, we only produce 0.2% of the pollution in the air or to contribute to the climate warming. But we are 6 in the world in terms of vulnerability. So we are aware of that crisis that we are as a local level. What we do it as part of our solution, local solution, because we need to do it from all levels, from personal level, from local level, from nation level, and so on and so on. So we are doing our part. we have signed and implemented the Universal Declaration for Common Good of Mother Earth and humanity. And we have enshrined in our Constitution the environmental protection. So that's from the law part. And from there, we have political will. We have implement political will. So even though we are a small country, economically and geographically speaking, we can have done things that I think could change some developed countries. For example, I'm just going to say one thing. We have made structural changes to ensure achieving good living, buen vivir. That's the basic. So in January, the Secretary General said, if we want to avert climate catastrophe, renewables are the only credible path forward. So we embark in that path since 2007, where the country produced only 25% of the GDP, but then now we are in the 75%. Oh, sorry, the 75% of using renewable. Just giving you an example. And I think that is from a very small country that doesn't have any resources at all.
Thank you, Giselle. That's a really, really great example. I'm going to move on. I'm going to get back into some questions from the floor. Abby and James, maybe you'll have a chance to say something in the quick wrap up. Sorry, I think we just want to get some more opinions from the floor. Question over here. And I think while you're doing that, just this point on finances, you know, it's very interesting, quite instructive to me always to look at the amount of money, for example, that is invested globally in fusion research versus the amount of money that's spent on classic military budgets. And you know, it's 1,000 times difference. We spend something like 2 trillion a year globally, I think, on military investments and about 2 billion on fusion. So this goes back to something that someone else said earlier on, which is as a human species, like what's the priority that we're setting? I think the numbers show something quite fascinating there.
I'm interested in the cloud, in the panel's thoughts on cloud computing. We're seeing massive growth in.
I think in the top. Yeah. Just talk to the top to the antenna bit, and then we can hear you better.
Start again. I'm interested in the panel's view on cloud computing. We're seeing massive growth in data centers to the point of west of London, there is no spare capacity for housing or business now on the network. We're seeing huge volumes of traffic due to social media, TikTok, etc. And increasingly, we're seeing critical national infrastructure being managed and or operated via the cloud, often outside of the jurisdiction in which that infrastructure is based. Surely we are creating a massive resilience problem, and also we're doing nothing for climate change. The panel's thoughts.
Thank you. Another great question. So, John, let's start with you, and then I'll rotate through the panel. And actually, if you might just answer the question, I'll give you you can take this mic in a minute. Oh, here, there's one coming down. So if you could answer the question and maybe just give us any wrap-up thoughts as well at the same time, and then I'll go through the panel because we're a bit restricted on time. We're about 5 minutes, right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Sure. So, I mean, it's a very good question, and it requires longer than we have to answer that. I must admit, I'm very worried about movement of things to the cloud for 2 different reasons. One is the environmental impact. You know, data centers and comms now, I think it's only about 2% of the consumption of electricity on the planet, but that's still a very, very big number. You know, much, 10 times your country. Right, so I think the impact of that is great, and things like these large language models, which are immensely costly to develop, but also to use. You know, I'm dubious about the moral sustainability of using things of that sort of nature. So that worries me. But also what you say about resilience and robustness. I know organisations that are moving bits of what I think are critical national, local infrastructure onto the cloud, and I'm extremely worried that they don't have suitable control, because I mean, you talked about things like genome, but to me, observability of the state of the system you depend on is absolutely critical. If you don't actually know where it is, and Google, their resourcing scale is about 1 major center per 100 million people. So it's very likely that your data center is not in your country, even if you're a relatively small country. So I think that's going too far, and maybe that is the sort of thing where we do need some legislation to help us do that. But as A final comment, if I may, as you said, from my experience, resilience comes from people. And actually what we need to do is design systems as joint cognitive systems. You know, we have the technology. We also need to understand the role of the people there, enable them to engage in decision making, but also design the systems to give them time to be able to think. If they don't have enough information, to be able to gather information before it's critical to make that decision. And things that I've seen that work well have actually had that temporal element to them that have enabled a system that has encountered a really difficult situation to be managed effectively without really adverse consequences. So it's, remember, resilience comes from people and design accordingly.
Thank you, John. Abby, do you want to maybe just give us a quick minute? We're going to go a bit random. We're going to go a bit randomly, right? Just a minute, if you wouldn't mind, Abby, because I think we're pressed.
The data center power issue is a serious issue. I think the solution ultimately depends on innovation. It's not at all clear we can deal without the replication worldwide because of resilience that is driving the power needs. Just as a final comment related to the online question that you asked, Jenny, I think the real issue that we have in terms of finding a way to build resilience against extreme hazards is basically finding a way to enable decision makers at all levels, and certainly ultimately including the populations, to recognize that there are opportunities here. There's a way to engage. And this is an area where we can learn from what's happening with the revolution now in the push toward distributed energy, renewables, and reduced carbon to address climate change. No, the problem is not solved, but yes, something absolutely remarkable has happened. We have most of the world agreeing that this is something that they need to work on together. And yet the industrial infrastructure that is wrapped as a layer all around the Earth is extremely vulnerable, risking imminent threats, and we have not yet achieved that same level of global understanding that there's an opportunity to work together to address this. So we need to take the lesson learned from the Green Revolution and move it into addressing these extreme hazards.
Great stuff, Abby. James.
I like the question, the environmental and security issues of the cloud. I wish I knew what the answer is. What do we actually do about it? Do we cut off access to the cloud? Do we tell our populations, no, you cannot have this data that you've come to rely upon? Because a government that did that would be out of office. Politicians do not operate on the basis of what is moral. They operate on the basis of what will get them elected. That's just the reality of life. And so, yes, Avi is right. We need innovation. Possibly we need new power sources, possibly directly beamed power from the sun. I mean, that's now a thought and possibly coming up to a new technology. But do not think that this is going to be an easy issue to solve.
And we'll just take Lawrence, and then Giselle can go finish up, I think, for us. Sorry, I should have passed this one over. Lawrence.
Thank you. Well, the cloud, what is it? Well, it's somebody else's computer. So anything that I consider personally critical, I do not touch the cloud with the barge pole. Really, really simple. What companies I work with, what they do is entirely up to them, but I think they're pretty stupid.
Excellent. Thank you, Lawrence. And Giselle, final word from you.
I don't know much about how to reduce the impact of cloud in the global warming, but I think we need to. It's a way that the world communicates, and it's the way to share and to so there is knowledge there. So we cannot eliminate that. I don't think that's the way. I think we need to find, as Lord James said, to find a way to use innovation to be more effective, environmentally speaking. But one thing that I wanted to stress is one thing that you mentioned. Resilience comes from people. And this is our experience, as a country. And for example, the principles of our own climate actions in the country involves gender equality, involves intergenerational focus, share responsibility at the local level, so everybody needs to get involved, an intercultural and dialogue of knowledge, you know, the knowledge of our ancestors, how to implement that and not to eliminate, but to get the best of it, and knowledge, to share the knowledge of what is going on, that the people understand, that the people learn what they can do to be resilient. And all of our actions, you know, being reforestation, being land, nature-based solutions, we have involved normally around 1 million people of relevant stakeholders, women, youth, social groups, private company, communities, farmers, and Afro-descendant people. Because if we're going to build ecosystems and resilience of ecosystems and the conservation of biodiversity, and we need to make their life sustainable, and they need to be part of it. That's the only way. You cannot take away the livelihood. You need to own the livelihood and make them own ways to build the resilience. That's the only way we think. On the final thoughts, we think we need to advance simultaneously. Otherwise, we are not achieving anything. Mm-hmm. We know there are global efforts. You are doing, you know, all the scientists are doing a lot of, you know, thinking and innovation and everything. But as long as that is not shared and implemented and tried and, you know, put it in the real world, we will continue destroying the environment, the ecosystem, the biodiversity will be wiped out, and we need to, and we moving closer and closer to the brink. So I just wanted to call that and that we need to work together. We need to continue to work together.
I think that's a really great point, Giselle. Sorry to cut you off a bit there, but I think that's a great point to maybe close. I think the message there around convening and bringing people together to connect on these ideas and think to.
Just one line.
Okay, we're very pressed on time, Giselle.
The last line. We need to care for this planet the way we care for our family, the way we care for our own home. When something gets wrong, we fix it. So this is how we need to do it. And this is how Nicaragua is doing it. So I think that there is something that we can do if we feel on that.
Well, I thought you'd already said something great to close, but then you topped it with something even better. I think that is a perfect way to end. I will say nothing more than that. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure chairing the session. Another round of applause, please, for the panelists. Avi is going to say something to close, I think.
You were talking about the 20-minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
The closing event.
No, well, this. I know, but Professor Ocheng, this is. So let's share some final.
Yeah, let me do the host bit, and then I will let the president close the conference, if I may. So the first really is just to thank you all most sincerely and from the bottom of my heart, you know, for coming. This particular conference has been in the planning for quite a while. Udi, I cannot remember now.
I was recovering from a severe
Yes.
injury, bike accident, and there was nothing to do. I mean, we were all under COVID, so the only thing to do was get on Zoom and find new friends.
So I find it hard, but I am thanking the bike for the meeting, right? And since then, we've been talking almost every other day. Exactly. And Udi introduced me to Avi. And then I got to meet Leahy. Where's Leahy? Yeah. You've seen Leahy over the last 2-3 days. Dynamo, you know, the engine of what has been happening. So really, thank you very much for attending. I cannot overemphasize the importance of what we're doing. As I get older, I'm becoming more and more societal. Yeah, I'm caring more about people, you know, more about the planet and so on. And I think there isn't a better calling really for us to get together to try to, and I get a bit emotional, obviously, looking at my students over there, because I'm thinking, if we are failing you, I'm sorry, but at least you got the opportunity now to take things forward from here in terms of helping us address some of these significant global challenges that we're facing. Our colleagues have traveled miles from the United States, from Israel, from all over the world. We've got people online and so on. So as Leahy put it earlier on, we got to do something now. Some material will be coming your way. Please sign up. Get talking to your organizations, your friends, your networks. Let's get together. I'm really keen to get the tools going. The tools, genome. Get involved. The idea of educating the public, the idea of educating politicians, and so on. We are in it together. I mean, this one is for us to lose as a community. So we really have to be wanting to do something, if not for us, for our children, their grandchildren, and so on. Our Excellency has mentioned caring about the planet like we care for ourselves and for our homes and so on. There is no better message. That's the way it's got to be. Atula, our professor there, Atula mentioned something about who pays. I normally talk about money last. So sometimes people run away when you say, okay, who's going to pay? Somebody has to pay in terms of the resources that are needed and so on. Again, you know, collectively, it would be interesting to think about that as we go forward. So we also welcome your thoughts on revenue generation, you know, resource mobilization and so on, to be able to get this show on the road so that we can protect not just our local infrastructure, but also as a global community in an interconnected world, supply chains and so on. To quote the legend who was here, Toby, we are all developing countries when it comes to this one. So I think we need to get together. And just finally to say that this would not have been possible if not for the work of a few of my colleagues here at Imperial, Dr. Jenny Gambona, who is here. Jenny. She's a star. And Tim Gordon, where is Tim? Udi, obviously is Udi there, at the engine of everything else. And Udi has brought us the family into this in the form of Leahy. So, by the way, we will be thanking them properly. So you're not seeing a huge bouquet of flowers here, but there will be, including digital ones, coming your way. So just to say, for the avoidance of doubt, there will be a proper thank you, which is going to be digital, online, and so on. So thank you very much indeed. And I'll leave now the floor to the President, Avi Shnur, to say a few words and to officially close the Resilient Renewable Planet. I call it global conference because that's what it is, R2P, and hope to see you again very soon at different fora including another annual event come 2024. So thank you very much indeed for coming, and safe journey, safe and secure and resilient journey back home, and see you soon. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, Professor Oching, you didn't leave me too much to say, so let me start with this. I am deeply honored to be here, to be working with you, with the remarkable institution, with Imperial College London, your department. I have to say the tour, the laboratory tour yesterday was absolutely remarkable. So, but all of the work that you're doing is exciting. It's going to be absolutely critical as we work to develop genome. The expertise you have here, sector by sector, down to the level of details, systems engineering capability, is going to be absolutely critical. So I'm excited about that as well. And I have to thank you very much, Ambassador, for being available for this important event. And incidentally, let me say this. It would be wonderful if the government of Nicaragua could become an advisory member of the Human Continuity Project and help us to learn some of the resilient lessons that you have learned. So we'll somehow I will get your email address and we'll get you the okay. We'll get you the information. But let me just finish with this. So as Professor Oching said, thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and those who are online, and those who have had to leave because the hour has come for people to go get on their flights and so forth. But thank you so much for being here. You know, I am an optimist. I don't think it would be possible for us to try to catalyze global resilience against extreme hazards without a good, strong dose of optimism. I think at the end of the day, if people are empowered to actually realize there are things they can do, if they're willing to get a bit beyond business as usual and focus on the good of their friends, their children, their friends' children, humanity in general, they will look for such opportunities and engage. So I think the future can be bright. The key is to find a way to empower ourselves. And the framework that has come together that we at EIS Council and others and Imperial College London have all brought together is really a tremendous opportunity. And I recommend we look at it as our collective project. And therefore, I have two suggestions. Take a look at the brief summary of the project, the white paper. Send your suggestions, what you recommend changing, and please be explicit. You know, we'll get it out to you. We'll get a version to you in text, and feel free to make red line suggestions. That will make it easy to take a look and to come up with a product that is a better fit to everyone's vision. And also, as you just said before, Professor, look at engaging with your organizations and with other organizations that you're connected to. We've talked a lot today about two levels of what is needed. One is the detailed, technical, strategic level. What needs to be done? What needs to be the content? And the overall plan, what are we going to actually engage with to build a plan to begin an evolutionary process to bring resilience against these extreme hazards to global civilization. But the more immediate requirement is to create the vehicle that will give us collectively the credibility to properly engage with the decision makers at the political level, in the private and the public sector, and all of the other venues that we're going to need to deal with. So any ideas people have would be more than welcome, but let's make this our collective project. And I want to finish by thanking, in particular, Chris, you. The extraordinary job that you've done. I don't know if you've had any opportunities for sleep, because I think you were the earliest here every morning, and I know you've been working on this for months. So thank you so much. And certainly, Lihi, there's no question the work that you did was absolutely critical. Udi, this is as much your brainchild as anyone else's, and I know that you've been working very, very hard. Certainly, I was telling my wife, Sarah, first of all, let me thank you, Sarah, my strategic advisor, who is certainly probably one of the very hardest workers to make everything that we do happen. But we were speaking this morning, and I was saying, it has been hard to find someone who feels the same compulsion that I feel to go try, in the limited time we have in life, to try to help address what looks like it's becoming the most serious problem faced by humanity. But I'm delighted to say that I think I have found someone. So thank you, Professor. Okay. Thank you all. Safe travels.